Hello and welcome to another session of The Change Exchange, where today my guest is Maya Fisher-French. She's just written a book called Maya on Money.
Yes, Maya on Money, Implement Your Money Change.
And you have a very active website and you write for City Press on financial matters.
That's correct, yes.
So good to have you.
Thank you.
I think this is a really important conversation to have. But when did you know you wanted to go into finance? Because your other major at university was still English.
You know, I feel so sorry for 18-year-olds today. I mean, you leave school and now suddenly you need to know what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So actually what happened, I was going to do law. I was going to be a lawyer. And I got some really good advice from a lawyer who said, don't go and study a planned law degree, go and do a broad BA and spend the extra year doing law, because it's the only opportunity to really get an opportunity to study and do other things. So I went to university and it was like a sweet shop for me. It was like, oh, these amazing subjects. And I did philosophy and English and I did Italian. And then there was a subject called economics. And I thought, well, that looks interesting. And I took it and I suddenly had this aptitude for it and a passion for it, and I landed up actually getting my honours degree in it. So you never know when you start exactly how it's all going to turn out.
So coming from school, your strong suit was the languages.
Exactly. I did French, I did English and all of those, and then I landed up, we weren't exposed to economics in those days at school.
But also economics is a long way from personal finance and planning your budget and that kind of thing. When did that happen?
I think a lot of it, again, now you see you've gone and chosen your subjects based on some random process. And then I finished studying and I had two job offers. And one was for an advertising agency and the other was for Investec Bank. I had no clue. So I looked at them and all I knew was there was a lot of drugs in advertising. So I decided to say no to drugs. Little did I know how much drugs there are in the financial industry. But that is how I landed up at Investec, and I was at Investec Private Bank and got involved very much in the personal investing. So it was the unit trust side, individuals, the retail investing side, and that is obviously where it all grew from and where my interest grew and where I learned so much.
Did you ever regret that choice?
No,
because
never.
It's quite radical.
It's very radical, but I look now at what my strengths are and also, the incredible need for financial education in South Africa, and I don't think I could have delivered as much in terms of going into advertising route as I have been able to in this sector.
Did your parents talk to you about budgeting and personal finance and that? Not at all?
Not at all. I think what I do remember growing up is that my mother used to always complain there was never enough money for groceries, that my father didn't give her enough money, and my father always was feeling that my mother spent money unnecessarily. And that was pretty much it. And then when I was 16 years old, my father died. And we were left with terrible debts. And I think that is, a lot of people...
And you were aware of that?
Then I was aware of it. So we lost everything. We lost our home. I remember one day coming home, my mother had to sell a piano just to buy groceries. So we went from having what appeared to be a good lifestyle to literally having nothing. And I mean, can you imagine? I look now, a single mom now with two teenage kids to support. She hadn't worked for 20 years. She'd been a housewife. And suddenly she had to pick herself up and
what did she do?
She went to a recruitment agency and she came back and she said, there's only one thing I have going for me, I don't smoke. But what could she do? She had been raising 4 children. My 2 older sisters had left home by then, but she cooked a lot of food and she went into catering and she actually started her own catering business. And then later on she became a national tour guide. She's fluent in Dutch. And I've watched my mother literally build her life from nothing to where she is today, which is financially secure and happy and all the rest. So she's an inspiration for me.
Well, she's also an education.
She's an education.
I mean, she's a walking example, a case study.
Exactly. She's a case study as well. And I think that's why I'm so fiercely independent about my money, my own finances, and why when it comes to women and money, I have a really big passion, because I think women often choose to leave those decisions to their partners without understanding the real implications of that.
We kind of drift into things very often.
Exactly, and you know what I do think sometimes is that if you don't know, you don't have to take action. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's easier just to put your head in the sand.
You don't have to take responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's his decision.
His decisions, and it's his fault. Yeah, let's be honest.
So when did the shift come towards journalism? How did that happen?
Well, that was, I'd been working in stockbroking by now, so I'd left Investec and I joined a stockbroking firm. And I fell pregnant. Well, I chose to be pregnant, it wasn't an accident or anything, but I got to a point where I decided that I didn't want to do the 14-hour days, and stockbroking is very long. It was also at the time, it was the late 1990s when the dot-com bubble was really brewing, and I just had got quite tired of the avarice that I was seeing around me and people wanting to double their money in a month, and it really became quite not a pleasant environment to be working in from my point of view. And I decided to become a stay-at-home mom. It lasted a year. And I realized that I learned a lot about myself then. And one of them was the financial independence. I wanted to be able to pay for my own facials. I didn't want to have to ask my husband for money. And I also had a need to work. And so then I did various things, including financial recruitment for a financial industry. And then there was this advert in the newspaper for This Day, the newspaper. Do you remember This Day?
Yes,
One
I
day,
do.
any day.
Yes.
And I happened to know the consultant that had brought the group to South Africa. So I phoned him and I said, you know, this sounds interesting. Can I come chat to you about it? And he said, sure. And I popped round to
I
his
do
offices.
have English 3. I
I
can
do,
write.
I have English. So, and I sat down and there was John Mattison, who was the managing editor of the newspaper. I wasn't expecting to meet him. And he looked at me and said, well, what do you know? What's your experience? I said, I have no experience at all in journalism, but I've worked in the financial industry for X amount of years. And they hired me that day. And, you know, really, it sounds like a cliche, but I found my calling. It was just, I loved every single minute of that experience. And I have ever since.
So what's the lesson out of that? Try.
Go
Step
try.
forward.
You don't
Yeah.
know. And I think
Yes.
you know what also and this is something I suppose in a personality, I do take big risks. I think, well, okay, if it sounds like fun, I'm in. Well, that sounds like fun. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But there you are.
But you say you found your calling. Was there a moment that someone responded, or you got a phone call, or a friend said over dinner, I read this and it changed my life? When did you know that this was
I think it started off with just the intellectual capital that I was working with. And you know, journalists are extremely intelligent people. And I don't think I'd ever realized the wealth of knowledge. A lot of people who go into journalism are just, they have incredible knowledge. And they love investigating things and they love finding out. So I sat in this team of amazing people, specifically at This Day at the time. They'd hired sort of the creme de la creme of journalism. And to be surrounded by this intellect was so stimulating for me on one level. And then the other was this opportunity to educate people, but without being in the product system, being outside of the financial industry, to have the independence I have the knowledge, but I now have the independence as well to say what I actually think. And I really enjoyed that as well.
And the book, how did that happen?
Well, I think the book was inevitable in one way because obviously it's a conversation with readers over the last 12 years and it's really putting it all together, the many articles that I've written and many of them in response to readers' queries. But the publishers came to me and said to me, would I consider a book? And I thought about the books that were already on the shelves. And we've got some excellent money books on the shelves, but they tend to be more about the psychology of money and money attitudes and approaches to money. And what I found readers really were looking for was the practical stuff. Okay,
Yes.
how do I open a bank account? How do I get a credit record? How do I budget? And it was those how do I. In fact, I think I first wanted to call the book And Now What? You know, because okay, I want to do all the right things, but now what? But the publishers said that wasn't a very good name, so they seem to know better than, and I think they did know better than I did. But that is, so that's how it came about. It's really the need for a lot of practical information.
And it's been out there a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
How's
about
it
a month
going?
now. It's going incredibly well. The feedback, I must say, has surprised me. And again, it comes back to filling a need, which is financial information. Practical, unbiased financial information when you want to make a choice or decision to have access to that information immediately. So the response has been phenomenal so far.
Why do you think people find it so difficult to talk about money? Because we do. It's not something, you know, sex and money and politics you're not supposed to talk about.
I think money is such a fear-based thing. We fear not having money. We fear if we have money what other people will think of us or want from us. So I think to me fear is a big part of money, and I think that's why we don't want to talk about it. And people also, on the other side, if you don't have money or you're struggling or you've got debts, there's an embarrassment. I mean, you know, if you swipe your card at the teller and it doesn't go through, how that makes you feel at that moment. So these are conversations people feel very uncomfortable about having. And then there's this whole belief that it's wrong to want money or wrong to be rich, which also, I think, there's some sort of moral, a value,
overlay,
exactly, the approach to it. So people also then don't want to talk about it if they are successful, or if money is a particular goal for them. So I think, to me, money is just a big emotional sort of mess, and really fear is the overriding emotion in there.
And why should we talk about it?
Well, I think we should talk about it because money is actually one of the most powerful things in our life. It is powerful in its ability to destroy your life, and it's powerful in its ability to build wealth for you. And I think we need to harness that power. I always look, my children watch these Disney programs, and the power, and the evil guy and the good guy, and that's money. Money has power. It's how you wield that power, and you choose how to wield that power. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we educate people on how to wield this power, our better our societies are going to be.
It can be Thor's hammer, but he must decide how to use
Exactly,
it.
exactly, yeah.
So do you talk to your children? You have 2 young boys.
Yes. Oh no, we have a lot of money conversations, partly because of what I do for a living. And in fact, I took them to my book launch in Johannesburg. They came with me. And my eldest afterwards was very impressed. He didn't know that he had 100,000 Rand saved up. Do you know that? 200 Rand a month. I've been putting away since he was 2 years old in Satrix.
And you never told him
how
much it is?
Well, he'd always told me I had the investment, but obviously the actual amount, I'd never really, I was preparing for the book launch and I mentioned it and all the rest. Well, his eyes went this big. My little one was a little upset. He wanted to know where his was. I said, no, we've also got for you. But he, the next day, after listening to my presentation, my little one was playing a card game. He took a pack of cards.
He's what, 10?
Yes, he's 10. And he was like, Mommy, look, this man has so much for emergencies, so much insurance, this money's for his rent, and this is his day-to-day money. And I thought, well, there you are. And, my conversations with my children, which I have written about in the book, because they're just so, I think they just open my eyes to how much children can engage about money if you let them. And, to see how easily they can assimilate this information. I mean, if you're teaching your kid at 10 those kind of principles, well, they're going to have a better start in life.
Absolutely. And when that happened with your mother, when she was in such dire straits, did she talk to you and your sister?
She did speak to us about money, but it was more, again, out of the fear-based stuff. Yes. So it wasn't positive. It wasn't a positive conversation. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of resentment. So I would say it wasn't necessarily positive, but obviously we knew that there was absolutely no money. And it also, what's interesting to me is I look now at my money attitudes and my money issues, and I still have that fear of not having money, despite, doing the right things and all of that, because you just think overnight things can change, because that's what the message I got, that things change. And, I think with children, what's so important is to educate them with money, but not to put fear in them. And I've made that mistake. With my own children, where it's like, oh, I can't afford this and I can't afford that. And you're suddenly realizing that you're making them nervous and scared about money. And that's the one emotion we really don't want to be putting into our children. So I think those money conversations need to be positive. And if you are struggling financially, that doesn't necessarily need to be translated directly to your children. It can be about, we need to focus on this at the moment. We need to be, just cutting back there or whatever, because we want something better tomorrow. I think we have to be very, very careful about passing on those fears to our children.
And do you think that you have managed to do that with your kids, or do you
no.
think?
Not successfully enough. And I was telling you the story we had. I hope I am, but I certainly have made a lot of mistakes. And when we were moving from Johannesburg down to Cape Town, my husband was in between jobs, so things were a bit tight, and obviously there's the cost of moving and all those things. So I had cut back on the extramurals at school, and we were selling our house and all of these things. And my little one, who was 6 at the time, one day burst into tears. He says, Mommy, are we poor? Are we going to have to live out of a car? So I said to him, what are you talking about? And he said to me, but Mommy, you say there's no money, and we're selling our house, and we're climbing in the car to drive down to Cape Town. This is it. And I suddenly realized how important, how careful you have to be. Now, I do think that not in a million years could I have thought that that's how he would read it, but still, that was a huge reflection for me on how careful one has to be about talking about one's finances negatively. And at that, what I did is I actually sat down with him and I showed him, he literally wanted to see the bank statements and everything. And I was able to explain to him where everything was, where that we had insurance policies, that we had retirement policies, that we had emergency funds. And that, what also I realized was I was very fortunate to have those in place. So that when my child asked, I could make him feel safe. And I think that that's one message I would want to get out to parents is if your finances are in order, you make your children feel safe. And that's important.
And it's a real safety. I'm thinking of friends of ours who, through circumstances quite late in their lives, lost almost everything. And they protected their children against all odds. They called up all the investments to keep the kids at the private schools that they were at, et cetera, so that they shouldn't be touched. How do you feel about that?
You know, I think if they were doing that at their own expense, because then that's a problem. So it all depends, because now if you've wiped out your future to just protect your child today, what legacy are you leaving your children for the future? Because they now, I imagine, will be dependent on their children. They will have nothing. And only then will the children realize what actually happened. And I think one must also be prepared as a family to deal with issues and to take challenges together as a family. And you can sit down and you can say, we have a financial difficulty, we're still together, there's still food on the table, we can celebrate that. But we're going to have to look at what makes sense for us. And if the private school doesn't make sense for us, we need to look at other options. I do think the biggest gift, and I look at my mom, and the biggest gift she's given me is she's not dependent on me. And there's not a lot of families nowadays where the children are not having to support their parents in their retirement. And again, that was all her own doing. She could very easily have been in that situation. But I don't have that financial pressure of supporting elderly parents. So one has to sometimes look at what gift are you giving to your children if you're not preparing for the future? Is that a bit of a Trojan horse?
What is the best thing about doing your job as a journalist, about your writing in the City Press and your writing on your website?
I think there's two sides to journalism that I just love. One is that I get to meet amazing people and interview incredible people, and I enjoy their stories, and I really, really is a highlight of my job. And the other side is the educational side. When I get an email from a reader to saying, you actually have changed my life, or I'm doing something differently because of an article you wrote. I know it sounds like, but it's kind of, that's why we're here, isn't it? To make difference. And that feeds me. That feeds my value system, or feeds me.
Doesn't sound as if you're the kind of person who makes 10-year plans, but is there a vision board?
I'm the worst. I was asked the other day this, actually, somebody said to me, so now what? And I said, you have no idea. I have never in my life woken up with any grand plan. But I think what I do is I look at the opportunities that come about, and I think, okay, does that opportunity interest me? Where is it going to take me? So I'm always open to opportunity, and I think that means that you have to always be open to change and be prepared to change. So I think sometimes those 10-year plans actually are the opposite of that. They're not celebrating change. They're not allowing you to change if something comes along. So that is how I work. So yes, opportunities come, I weigh them up. Is this what I want to do? Is this taking me along the path that I wish to be on? And I make the decisions. But I can tell you there is no 10-year plan.